Hello, everybody. Hi, my name is Rajiv, and my pronouns are he, him.
And I'm Carly, and my pronouns are she, her. And welcome to the Queer Sober Social Podcast. We're a chill social group of LGBTQIA folks who want to do more with their lives than just drinking.
Whether you identify as in recovery, sober curious, or just wanted to be sober while you're listening in, we're happy that you're here. And with that, let's get started. Welcome, 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 everybody. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about business and queerness and sobriety and a bunch of other things too. In case you don't know, my background happens to be within the business realm. I have an MBA, I've been sitting in business for a while, so that is something I'm very familiar with. But we have a very special guest today, Phoebe, who will definitely introduce herself in a second. But for those of you who don't know, Phoebe is actually one of the original founders of Chicago Queer Sober Social and Queer Sober Social generally. And her brainchild and some of her ideas have led us to have this podcast, which is amazing. So um, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to all come together and just chat a little bit about business stuff, with, of course, the queer and sober lens. So, of course, take it away, Phoebe.
Oh, thank you, Rajiv. And it's so nice to be here. It's a very surreal moment. So I'm very grateful to be sitting here talking to both of you right now. Hi, Carly.
Hi.
Hi. A little bit about me. I live in Chicago and I identify as queer. I identify as femme. I use she, her pronouns and identify as cis. I am polyamorous and I have two significant grounding relationships, and those are great and soul filling. I'm a bit of a relationship anarchist too, so we can talk about all that. But I left corporate America after 8.5 years doing B2B marketing and sales development for big tech companies and startups. And then I ended my career as an analyst consultant for Gartner, which is a big advisory firm and analyst firm. And I left last summer at the height of the pandemic. Well, the height of the pandemic, what does that even mean? It's still going. But I burnt out and I almost relapsed. And so I decided to finally pursue full time entrepreneurship. I was very fortunate and able to do that after saving for a long time and making lots of steps towards it. So we'll talk all about that, I'm sure. But I'm super glad to be here and excited to be chatting with you.
Yes, fabulous intro, Phoebe. Welcome to the podcast. We're so thrilled to have you on as a guest. And just a little background on you and I. We met in a different sober women's group, and I had followed you on Instagram before that. Instagram stalked you, and then was very much fangirling in real life when I got to meet you in person. And I thought you were cool. And, but at the same time, we were kind of on the outskirts of this just women's only group and wanted, I was just so attracted to the way that you were just so open about your queer identity and about being poly. And I was like, who is this person? Like, I've never met anyone just so confident in their identity. And this was me, like, in the middle of my own journey figuring out myself. So I just really looked to you as like, wow, like that could be me one day, just feeling really confident in my own skin and myself. So and we finally became friends and now you're here. And I'm just super stoked to have you on today. And I would love to chat with you more about like how queer sober social came to be. And I know us both being in that group and kind of feeling like the outsiders looking in on these women who were in long monogamous relationships with their significant others and with all of them being mostly straight and just being at these meetups and being like, these women are great. But where are my people at? Like, where are my other like queerdos, queer weirdos?
Hmm.
So I would love to hear like kind of the inception of the creation of Chicago Queer Sober Social.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell this origin story without talking about Holly. Holly was my co-founder, and she and I found each other through that group as well. And I remember her because I think she had her hair dyed like teal or something at the time. And I was like, she was kind of quiet. And we were sitting at this meetup with a bunch of, mostly straight cis women and self identifying as women. And um, being like, okay, this is a step, it's a social hour. We're socializing, we're not in a meeting. Loved that, like, loved the fact that we could just hang out and socialize. That was a new concept for me at the time. And Holly and I think Holly texted me. She got my number from one of the other girls, texted me and was like, heard through the grapevine you're a weirdo too. And so we ended up having lunch in Logan Square and walking around for hours, like for hours and hours, talking about life and getting to know each other and finding a lot of similarities in our stories, and knowing that we were both poly, we were both queer, we were both, in sobriety, obviously in recovery, and agreed that they're like, where were our other folks? Because for me, I spent a lot of time going to and throwing parties in the queer scene. I wasn't really, I'd go to bars, but I was an apartment party person. Like, I loved that shit for a lot of different reasons. And I loved throwing parties. I loved organizing people. I loved creating a space where everyone could just like be their full weird selves and have fun and socialize. And for a long time, that meant drugs and alcohol and all sorts of nefarious stuff. And then when I quit drinking, I couldn't go back into those spaces, and I felt like I lost a lot of my queer weirdo friends in the process because they were still in it. They were still drinking, partying, doing drugs, and I couldn't be in those spaces anymore. Of course, I had some friends come along with me, but it was definitely like the vast majority were still there, and I was like, bye, like, okay. Um, and so then after meeting Holly, we were talking, we're like, okay, we want to create a sober social space for queer people. And over a few weeks, I think it evolved. We started to talk, and we're like, okay, how can we do this with no money and no resources? And started to just bring our minds together. And really, it kind of evolved from there. We found a location that would do it for free at a coffee shop here in Logan Square. And we put it out on Facebook, used Canva for marketing, just like free, everything free we could find to create the marketing. And I come from a marketing background, so that really helped, I think. I know how to market, so I've got these like skills that were transferable, and then my enthusiasm for this space, I think, was helped generate it. And same with Holly's, obviously. So we found a space. Our first meetup, we had 100 people show up to this tiny coffee shop. We just blew it up, and people were like on top of each other. This is pre-pandemic. It was beautiful. It was so cool. I remember seeing the Facebook event have like 1,000 people RSVP'd, and being like, how, like, what? All these queers want to hang out in a dry environment. Who knew? And then from there, we had our second event at an amazing incubator slash event space here in Chicago called Reunion, which is run by Elijah McKinnon and Kristen Kaza, who are just incredible creatives. And Kristen is like Chicago's party mom, and Elijah is just this intensely amazing creative Black trans queer femme person who has been creating space in this capacity for a long time. They both have, and they, at this incubator, most of their events were dry. They didn't have alcohol yet. There wasn't a focus like, this is a social hour where there are no drugs and alcohol, and please don't show up fucked up. And so that it felt great to be held by these two queer, what I would consider them queer icons, and like I'm just eternally grateful for the work that they've done. um and yeah, that's how it started, and then the pandemic happened, so we had two and then y'all took over and really brought it into the virtual digital world. So I appreciate that, because I didn't have the energy to do it, and then I handed it off, and you were there, Carly, and then Rajiv's like started doing stuff with you, and you guys, now it is the amazing thing it is, and you've been innovating on it, and I couldn't have imagined anything better.
That's So kind of you. But like such a cool story to hear because
Yeah.
someone like me had come in so late. In our intro episode, we actually talked a little bit about that second meeting, just from our perspective, just because it was something that was so important and so critical of a juncture, really, just transitioning it from, all right, well, pre-pandemic, where there were so many people interested in winter in Chicago, like, uh, in not really having a space for this, and then all of a sudden that space being taken away because we're all like thrust into our homes and unable to meet all of a sudden. And so such a cool, interesting like way to see how that has also evolved. Because I didn't know that much about some of the stuff pre uh, QSS really existing. Um, and I think that kind of leads me to a question that I want to ask you regarding like, can you tell me a little bit more about like why community building broadly was just so important and what does that look like right now for you? In addition to just QSS, especially since you've handed over the reins, like what that looks like now.
Uh, I mean, community building for me, I think has always come naturally to me. It's this like thing that I have been able to do regardless of where I am. And I've just now started to really take that seriously, like to see that as my work and that it is like central to the work that I do and everywhere I do it. Um, I think so before Queer Sober Social, I was organizing in the alt sex community, doing events there and bringing people together. And before that, didn't was in college and in everything like student organizations and just and same with high school. So community has always been central to my identities and before I quit drinking, it was centered around partying and that identity and finding community and finding my people. I moved to Chicago 7 years ago, and I found community through the bar scene and the queer party scene, and was able to find people who shared my values and to be myself fully and express myself fully in a in a container when I wasn't out in the rest of my life at
Mm.
all. I was living a double life and a triple life in some aspects, and so I felt very safe and at home, where I could go dance, with beautiful women and I could feel safe and be myself and express the side of me that I couldn't in other areas of my life. So that to me, finding home, being able to feel safe and joyful in those spaces and free. And like I could just, it was like taking my bra off, it's like, oh, okay, I like can relax and be with my people. And I love providing that for other people or creating safe because it has been so important to me. And now in this COVID era, I've been realizing that storytelling and telling the truth is a way to do that in a virtual world where we can't physically be together as easily. And how do we create community? And to me, right now, how that's been showing up in my work is by creating space for people to tell the truth and to tell honest, raw stories and for people to connect that way. And so that's what I'm doing with the events that I've been working on with the team that I'm working with now. Um, and it's been hopefully effective for people. I mean, with the feedback we've been getting, folks have had that response, and I'm now just starting to have words to describe what it is we're doing. I think it's a really weird thing that happens, at least for me as an entrepreneur, is I'm seated with an idea, and then I'm responding to it physically and emotionally, and then taking it seriously enough to pour into it is one thing. And I've had a lot of things that I start, like the Chicago Queer Sober Social, and then I like to pass that on so other people can iterate on it because I have other work to do. And so it's like abundance, right? And um, and I had to do a lot of inner work to get to the point where I could take my ideas seriously and do something about them. Sobriety gave me that. So
That's so I love your story. I love everything you've shared so far. And you're just such a natural leader and community builder. And to just really hone in on that as like, this is what I do, this is what I'm good at. And like you said, taking it seriously, like you said, sobriety having to be the foundation for you to, figure out what communities you even need to build for yourself is huge. And then finding the community and because just being surrounded by people that see you and accept you for who you are is so critical to just like being in today's society. So you dropped some bombs in your introduction. Quitting corporate is a big one, and I would love to know more about what that looks like for you, what it's like being a sober queer entrepreneur now, and the amazing creative and community building that you are up to now that you have done so far in 2021, and what the future of that continues to look like for you.
Okay. So quitting corporate, I had been wanting to be a full-time entrepreneur for a long time, since before I quit drinking. I'm over 3 years sober. So I remember like brainstorming all sorts of different business ideas and like in a little Google Doc and just trying to make sense of my ideas. And I didn't know shit about entrepreneurship. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, so there are various people in my family who have businesses that they've started, like my sister, my parents, my dad, and my stepmom. My parents are divorced, so like lots of people building stuff. So it was modeled to me that you could have an idea and build it. I just didn't have the self esteem to think that I personally could do that until I did a lot of inner work through sobriety. And so I was working in corporate for those first 2.5 years of sobriety, and was slowly starting to disconnect and be like, this is not my path anymore. And I have something to say, and trying to refine what it is I want to say and what I'm trying to say through the work that I do like I'm just like barely scraping the surface on that. It feels like, and there came a point last summer. It felt like I was being groomed to lead this very safe life where I was going to just climb the ladder at Gartner or wherever, big corporate, insert here, and kind of bring in myself to work, but not too much. Like it had to be palatable. I couldn't like ruffle too many feathers or I couldn't wear this on a work call. You know what I mean? Like things like that. And I couldn't be too loud or too queer or too femme or too or like talking about like any of this. And it was so stifling. It felt like golden handcuffs. And I had to believe, after talking to lots of mentors in my life, that I could survive and be okay and thrive after making this decision to leave, because it is so safe. It was safe to me from a financial perspective. And then from a soul perspective, though, it was killing me. And I had to walk away from it because I was remember laying on the floor of my bedroom or of my kitchen last summer and just distraught, just crying, totally fucked up, really upset that I was burning out. I was totally burnt out, working way too hard on stuff I didn't care about at all, with people who hardly knew me. There were like two people who I let in and who actually wanted to see me. That's the other thing, is like you can try, but unless someone wants to receive you, it's very difficult to show up at work as your authentic self. Um, and so I was crying, and I get out, I pull myself together because I have to lead and facilitate an 80-person virtual Zoom call like 30 minutes later, which I did, which is not sustainable. And I was like, I'm going to relapse. It was this like really, really deep, dark thing that happened over the summer with everything going on, with the racial uprisings, with the fucking pandemic, with all this stuff. And I'm like, this is not what I want to do. This is not where I want to be. And so it took me like 2 months of I was able to use disability and go out on leave. And if you have access to that, I highly recommend advocating for yourself if you need that. Um, I didn't know I could do that until it was like desperate and I needed to try. And so I took some time away and I came back and I was like, yeah, I'm done. And it was one of the more scary things I've ever done, because it was stepping into, it's like, woohoo, it's like all on me, and holy shit, it's all on me. and and believing that I can do it, and having this like blind faith in myself, and then also being scared shitless every single day. And that's just pretty much how it feels every day now. It's like one day it feels amazing and I'm on top of the world and like I'm in alignment and everything is flowing and the connections are there and I'm building and I'm creating and it's blah blah blah. And then some days it's like everything's hard and it's stuck and no one gets it and ugh. But I would rather be doing this and be feeling that I feel more connected to my purpose and like source universe energy than I've ever felt. I feel like the veil is very thin with me right now, and that feels really interesting.
That's, I mean, it is a conversation that I think a lot of people who are still within the corporate realm just constantly dream about or think about, and then never really, pull the trigger, just jump out, like just, pull the ripcord, whatever uh, word you want to use or phrase you want to use, but like it never really happens. And I think one thing that is, I don't know, like it personally resonates for me is definitely this idea around just looking at what you have to move into if you move into the entrepreneurial realm, which is like, as you're saying, like it is very freeing that it is all on you. It is also very burdening that it is all on you because all of a sudden you have like, you don't have a nice giant company that has literal millions of dollars to like help support you or do something for you, or like have relationships for you or whatever. And now all of a sudden it's just you building something from the ground up, and that for sure, as it, I don't know, like it hits me right here, right?
Yeah, no, because it is. I think the cool thing is I'm in a space this week where, and I love to share this story because we've just come out of it as a team. So, my I have two co-founders of this next event, Mercy Bell, and hopefully she'll be on the pod here shortly, and Alyssa Hart. And Mercy and I were both at rival consulting firms. Her co-founder and my co-founder. So I was at a firm called Topo, and my co-founder and her co-founder worked together and split off and created these two separate firms. And she and I were both working alongside in the same space, like tech consulting. Didn't know each other, and she's been in recovery for about 8 years now, so she's a little further ahead than me. And then we both quit last summer. And then we didn't know each other still. And then I started talking about sobriety and not wanting to relapse on LinkedIn. And she saw me and was like, we should talk. We should know each other. And now we're creating these cool events together, um, where it's all centered on lived experience and storytelling around wellness and being true and telling the truth. And the first event we did was called Sober Voices Summit, and that was in February. We had 40 speakers, and they were amazing from all walks of life, talking about all sorts of different approaches to sobriety and harm reduction and recovery. Um, critiquing AA. It was just really a magical event, and we were able to pair speakers, and it was just a really cool. It felt really cool and important to do. That was an idea I had in my bathtub a few months ago, and took it seriously enough to do something about it, and asked Alyssa to help me build it. And then Mercy came in a couple months in and started to help us think about what was next while we were building Sober Voices. And with her, we have formed this next event called Take Care. And it's all about caregiving, like 4 dimensions of caregiving: self, relationships, work, and world. And so it's 4 days at the end of May. And we're building the agenda, and it's going to be mixed media. So, not just video, but like audio and artists and animation. And it's going to be really sexy and sensory overload, hopefully, in kind of a 2D, at least what it feels like. It's weird to be on this podcast on video right now having this conversation, but so that's what we're building right now. What was I where did I start? I
Well, I
don't know
mean,
how I got there.
a ba- I, what I could say is that a bathtub is a great place to have a really good
Yes.
idea. And I think
Uh,
what it triggers for me is just at least some questions around like where do you think the conversation around sobriety and within business actually is heading? Because like if you were doing these things that are incorporating elements of well-being, which is such a huge topic within corporations right now, and as limited as people's or as corporations' abilities are to actually action on it, that's slightly a different topic, but I think it's still part of the conversation. Um, Part of that, at least for us on this podcast and for all of us here, like is sobriety and some level of that. But that isn't normally a thing that you think about when you relate that back to business. And so, could you talk a little bit more about just like how that conversation has shown up for you?
yes, yes, absolutely. Sobriety was my superpower, is my superpower. It is the thing that allows me to show up the way I am and to be well and to when I get off, because for me, my lifelong battle seems to be perfectionism and overworking. And it's just something, these two things keep popping up. That's how white supremacy is manifesting in me. Like it feels like the most in terms of my own care. Um, is that I want to be perfect in everything I do, and I just want to like grind and grind and grind and grind and grind. And I I have these moments where I have to just stop. But I've been able to gain the skill set to be able to do that through the work I've done in sobriety to be well, and the way that I've done that has been through lots of different ways. Caring for myself is multifaceted, just like it is for all of us, and it's definitely my own flavor and my own way of doing it. We all have our own things we need to do for ourselves. I didn't follow a program. For me, my sobriety, it was like a choose your own adventure. Is kind of how I had to look at it that way for me in order to stay recovered and stay sober. And so it's worked well for me. Not that there's anything wrong with a program or anything like that at all. Um, but sobriety in business, it is a conversation that was always weird to have with people. I remember when I first quit drinking, I was still in the tech and like tech as a marketer. And it's tech. It's like any industry. You could say this about any industry. It's not just tech. It's everywhere. But it's wet and you drink. And I worked for an Australian tech company at the time, and happy hour started at 4 p.m. and I had evening calls with Australia, and I traveled there, and it was so glamorous until it wasn't, until it was horrifying and terrible things happened to me, and were of my own doing, and it just started to eat my soul away. And so when I talk about sobriety now, and I position it as this thing of empowerment, and that it is my superpower, and that it's awesome and beautiful and fucking hard. Um, it really challenges people because many people, the stigma is still there for most people, right? We're in this really sober positive space right now. And yet recovery, everyone knows someone who is either addicted to something, doesn't matter if it's alcohol or not, and I would argue that many people are struggling on some level with some sort of substance or something. And so we all have an opportunity to recover and recover ourselves in some sort of way. This just happens to be for me about alcohol, because that was such a tight relationship for so long. But in the business world, I felt there came a moment, you guys, when, and I say you guys as like genderless guys, just FYI. There came a moment where I was like, fuck it. I'm just gonna be me. And fuck everyone who doesn't agree with that. Fire me. I honestly felt like I was like, fire me. Do it. I dare you. And I started talking about being queer and being sober, and it was liberating. I had to do that. I remember like the first time I started to talk about it on LinkedIn, I felt like I was gonna shit my pants. Like I was so scared. I was so scared. And this saying has just held me in all of my work, and it's feel the fear and do it anyway.
Hmm.
And I know that there's so much privilege in where I sit right now in being able to do that, and in the corporate environment as a cis white able-bodied pretty, like, conventional, whatever, like, thin, all of that kind of like, all that privilege is there, and so I felt like, "Okay, if I can't do it, I mean, I need to be doing it." It felt like work I should be doing. So I did it, and I continue to do it, and it is a process of just coming out over and over again because people underestimate femmes. People don't think queer femmes are, gay enough or queer enough or straight enough or whatever, and so I continue to take up space, and that feels subversive. And then I get tired, and then I go hide, and then I come back when I feel rejuvenated. So I'm now in a space where I feel like talking again, but for the last month and a half, I was like, go away. Do not, no one talk to me. So I hope that answers your question. I mean, there is a lot of stigma in the business world. It is kind of changing from what I can see, at least in tech. In tech, there are more conversations about mental health this year than any other time I've seen it happen, and a lot of it is lip service. And a lot of it is people capitalizing on a trend and spinning off these consulting firms and being like, we're going to teach you about wellness. And it's like a bunch of, cis white guys. And I'm like, maybe, and that's important. Like those folks should also be doing that work. So I don't know. It's complicated. There is a story we met, or we know, I haven't actually met him yet, but Mercy met this gentleman named Chris Anthony, and he came out as sober at Salesforce. He's a VP, and he did it earlier in the pandemic, and they had so many people emailing him every day saying, I'm struggling with substances, I'm struggling with alcohol, that they created an internal task force at Salesforce to address sobriety within their employee base. So they call it Sober Force. I'm like, okay, if bigger companies like that are paying attention and are starting and trying, I think like anything, incremental change is what it is.
Absolutely. I mean,
Slow moving.
it's, I work in consulting, and banking and consulting are two very, very notorious industries for substance abuse of whatever form. And so something like that, hearing something like that is, sure, like it's a really good step forward. And for a corporation, that is a giant step forward because it's not something that like the entire beast generally tends to work towards. And so hearing stuff like that is definitely really interesting.
Yeah.
So much of what you said, I just love how real you're being. I love how much this is resonating, even though I'm not necessarily, coming from corporate right now. So much of your story leading up to you quitting corporate reminded me so much of getting sober and how this thing is just, and it doesn't matter what it is, whatever your substance is for you this time around, it was corporate. It's crushing your soul. It's this point of like no return of just like, I know for a fact I can't continue to live my life in this manner, in this way, with this thing in my life. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what's going to happen to me, but all I know is that I just can't do this, not
Yeah.
this. It can't be
Oh,
this. And just that knowing of the like, just having that intense knowing of that, it makes the possibilities for the future, like, I don't know, just that much more freeing. It's like it doesn't even matter because as long as you have, like, that feeling of, it doesn't matter what I do as long as I know I'm walking away from this, I will be okay. And you found
yeah.
you found that to be true time and time again.
Yes.
And you can like replace corporate with whatever you want it to be, but it's the same thing. Like you don't have to know what's next. All you have to know is what you're not going to tolerate, and setting that boundary with yourself and your life.
Uh, it is a boundary. It's a self boundary. It's for me, it ended up being my boundary as I put my health first.
Mm.
And that's it. And sometimes I forget that. But most times these days I course correct pretty quickly because like earlier this week there were a couple of days where we were in it. Oh, I forgot to tell the story about me and Mercy. Um we were reenacting all the shit we learned in toxic corporate life and tech life. We were reenacting and doing it to each other.
Hmm.
And so we decided to stop and just recalibrate and be like, what do we really want as a team of people, creative people, like building stuff together? And we want to be angel baby butterflies and just make our art and write and be at ease and have fun and feel sexy. And that's what we are creating together now. Not we were like trying to create a tech company because it's all we knew. And it wasn't working. It hurt. It was painful. And so we stopped, and now we're just angel baby butterflies. And but that just happened. So I wasn't eating. I wasn't remembering to eat. I wasn't sleeping well. We were triggering each other. I was disassociated. It was awful. And so it's like, fuck that. We got to untangle it and detox from it and continuously unpeel it and take it. It's like pulling it out of you and being like, what actually do I want? What actually do I believe in? And it is not that. I'm not sure, but we're creating it together now. It's very a reoccurring theme of
Yes.
deprogramming.
Yeah, right. You don't just quit corporate one time. You don't just come out as sober, come out as queer one time. Like you're continuing to do it over and over and over again. You have to reprogram your whole life. And it can seem daunting, it can seem overwhelming, but like I said, once you know like this is the dead end, like anything that you do in the other direction is always going to lead you back to yourself. That's a fact.
Yep. Mm.
So
I just remember, I just remember wanting what I have now and
I feel
um,
that so strongly
being
too.
like just being in awe of that. I'm sure you both understand. And being in awe of how much despair and suffering there has been, even in sobriety. And then taking my needs and my desires seriously and my well-being seriously and advocating for it and fighting tooth and nail and being like, no, fuck that. I am worth this. I have something to do here. I have people to help. And I can't do that if I'm unwell. Um,
And finding your purpose in sobriety too. Like I would try all day, every day, read every self-help book, try and find what's my purpose. And you know what? It wasn't available. It wasn't accessible to me while I was drowning myself in drugs and alcohol. It was there. It was like behind a glass. Like I felt like the life that I had now, I knew it was inside me, but it was just like inaccessible behind this glass wall. And or whatever, behind a block of ice. And then when you get sober, it just starts to melt and you start to have access to these things that are parts of you that you've always known are to be true about yourself, but just we're not able to, dig deep and have it. And then once you do, oh man, that's where everything just it sounds wild, but just things just become revealed to you. And as you take more steps in the right direction, the path continues to just unfold and leap and the net will appear. Feel the fear and do it anyway. Like when you're doing all that, it like I'm not saying it's always going to be perfect. I'm not saying it's not going to hurt or be hard, but when you are doing it, you will be this like so authentic version of yourself that none of like the outcome almost doesn't even matter because the outcome is just you doing what you're supposed to be doing for your own self in your own life because you're doing what you had to do to save your life and now this is like the life that you get to lead because of that.
mm, I'll just sit for a second. I was like, speak on it. Okay. Like, no, it's so good. It's so good. And it's a process, it's a continual process. You never arrive. And it's just everything feels more light now because I feel like I continue to look at death or what I feel like is my version of death as a living person and be like, not today. I'm not doing that. And I feel like I'm in the simulation now, whereas before I was letting life happen to me and now I'm like, okay, what are we going to do today? How are we going to create some stuff and just trusting that I'm going to figure it out or I know people who can help me figure it out and trusting that the path will unfold and I'll be held and taken care of. And not that that's it's like really easy to say shit like that, but it's also very hard because of the real things about making money, surviving, being well, all of that. It's not a given. It takes a lot of hard work. And also I come from privilege. I come from a background where I'm able to do that. And so to me, it's like even more urgent that I continue to step in and stop being selfish with my gifts so that I can share those gifts with people to help other people liberate and heal as well, and that has given me so much purpose, um and balancing other people and helping and being a healer and a creative with my own self and not just like giving everything to everyone all the time anymore. I just don't do that anymore.
I love it. I love your mindset. I love how, you have to save your own life before you can save others. And I love how you speak on your privilege too so openly and how we have to use it to help others that we know aren't like that don't have the same privilege as we do in the ways that we do.
Hmm.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Hearing about like you knowing that there is something inside you that you just needed to make happen, but you were not in the right circumstances to make happen, and then going through the pain and like suffering to make that happen is such a yes. Is such an important like and difficult thing that I don't think many people are truly brave enough to do because those other concerns of like feeding yourself and getting paid and like having housing or paying student loans or whatever are really hard and many times like the thing that keeps people from being able to make some of those decisions. But can definitely appreciate just how much you have gone through, even like in spite of that, basically.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've done a lot of shit for money and I don't talk about it publicly, but um yeah, it's interesting what people assume about you and your experience and what you have or haven't done. Um
Totally.
but and I think it's important to know that I saw this good meme the other day, and it was like, yeah, sure, like people need to go to therapy, but what most people need is money, and that's true. And most of my work is in the redistribution of wealth. That's what I feel like my work is, and so that's where I'm sitting today in the work that I'm doing is redistributing wealth from corporations and wealthy individuals to other folks who don't have access to it the way that I do. Um, yeah, I don't know.
It's a very
Next.
Robin Hood-esque noble goal.
Yeah, yeah, I guess.
I guess before we maybe wrap up the
I
podcast side of things, or Carly, did you want to ask something else?
Yeah, no, I love how we bring the memes into this because the memes in the past year have like really kept me going and are just on point. But then there's like the other memes that are just like you're not just alive just to pay bills and die. Like you're alive to be alive. Like you have this one life and I get it, like money is a thing, but in some regards you can't let money stop you from doing what feeds your soul and what like makes you come alive and what feels good. And sometimes we get so blinded by the finances or things that might look good on paper. In reality, like our soul is not on that paper at all, but we're like enticed by it. And so it's so difficult to make the decisions, but at the same time, the one thing that never changes is that you get this one life and that's it. And it's like, what are you going to do with it? And it makes taking the risk that much easier and harder because like like I can't live my whole life without at least trying this, whatever it is. And then, taking that step in that direction leads you just on this whole new journey and it snowballs. And that's where all the fun and the play can come in. I mean, it's also going to be work and stuff like that too. But I don't know. I, I get it. I get both sides of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there's this like delineation of those who are very real, like very really do not have access to resources, and aren't able to have consistent access to resources. And those are folks who are typically not white people, not affluent, like not people who are in these corporate positions where they could leave them, or they have this luxury of imagining what if I could follow my dreams. And i I've been feeling a little aggressive with this perspective lately, where for the people I know who are gainfully employed, and then they're like, oh, I just can't do it. And sorry, Rajiv, I'm like I feel like I'm talking to you right now, but like it's like it's almost it's the golden handcuffs, you know. I'm not when I say this though, I'm not talking about those who do not have access to consistent resources
Correct.
that where they can pay their bills and feel safe in many different ways and well in many different ways. But for those who have access and could very easily walk away, it is really just fear and this inability uh to allow your imagination to think past the fear and be like, well, what if I pursue that? Or it really, I don't want to like bypass anyone either, because that shit is so real. I've lived through it and worked through it, and it is terrifying. That is the work, is to be like, do I believe I can try? And do I have a plan if everything blows up? And you probably can figure that out too, whatever the plan is. Like most of the time you can figure some shit out. It is just, you don't have to leave your job either. Like you can stay employed. You can do like one tiny, I called it when I was still in corporate and still trying to like see my way out and be sober and be well and all this stuff. Like there was this passage in a book called Women Who Run with the Wolves, calling it little sips of air. Like you come
Mm.
up for little sips of air to feed your soul when you're in it. And what does that little sip of air look like? For me, it looked like posting a sexy selfie on Instagram. Like sometimes that felt so subversive. And I kind of just knew it was a tiny little stepping stone into what I would one day become, because my body was telling me that. I was just listening to my body, and it was like, yeah, just post that. That makes you feel sexy and kind of like good, and it's different from what you're doing, and it felt like a lifeline to the future. And so I don't know what that looks like for you, and you will know that. But
Sure.
for me, that's like an example of what it felt like, that little sip of air, of like fresh air, when I felt like totally in it.
I can definitely relate and understand like what you're talking about. Like those little sips of airs, little teeny tiny emits sometimes one molecule of oxygen that you get like
Yeah,
can sustain you for quite a while.
it can. It's soul food.
Before we actually wrap up the podcast part of this, um, maybe you could tell people a little bit about like what are you up to now? Where can we find your work? Give yourself a chance to use your platform. Like,
Yeah, well, you can find so my next event is called Take Care, and it's from my founding team, Mercy and Alyssa and I. It's on Instagram. You could find it take_care, and care has a four instead of an A. Or you could just go to Ask Facet on Instagram, and it's linked there. But it's that 4-day event. I think it's going to be free to consume, to anyone, to consumers. We're going to work on brands and corporate sponsorships so that it can be free. um, and that will feel really good. It'll make it really financially accessible for everybody. But yeah, you can find me there. I'm on Instagram at Phoebe Claire Connie Bear. I'm sure they'll share this information in the show notes. Or you can go to askfacet.com. That's Facet is kind of our holding brand for our
hmm,
events, and the name of our company that we're working on forming. It's a work in progress. We don't know exactly what it's going to be, but we know that we like working together right now. So it's unfolding. We don't have the answer yet, which is really fun.
I mean,
And
that's
also, I just want to use my platform to plug a couple people's work. La Conexión is a cutie BIPOC, really amazing resource group for cutie BIPOC folks. They have weekly meetings where they support people who identify as cutie BIPOC and in recovery or sober. And Carolyn at Recovery for the Revolution is someone you should follow. They talk a lot about recovery and the revolution, and how we're all going to manifest this future of sobriety as a bunch of queer people trying to lead liberation. And I think everyone should listen to them, and also listen to La Espiritista, is a queer trans person of color who is doing amazing work creating space for QI BIPOC folks in recovery too. So go listen to them, pay them, Venmo them. I hope you can add their information in the show notes here.
yeah, for sure. Send them
Thank
over.
you. Cool. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Phoebe. It's been such a pleasure to have you on. Any last parting words or anything before we close out, either from you or Carly?
Oh, just listen to yourself, listen to your body, and take those little sips of air whenever you can, in whatever way you can, whether it's in sobriety or work stuff or whatever process or journey you're on. You know that the work is in those little sips of air. The work is in the tiny, 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 tiny baby steps every single day. That is the work. That is the process. It is never done. I'm still in it every single day, taking little sips of air. It's better now. Everything's a lot better now. And still, it can be really hard, like last week when we were going at each other and just trying to pull capitalism out of us, but while still being in it like we all are. So that's it.
That's the work. I think that's it. That's a wrap.
Well, I think this wraps up our episode. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one as it comes out, because we try to launch an episode every other week. You can find the video podcast on twitch.tv and YouTube, and that happens to have exclusive content, which we'll be running into just after this. But for those who are just listening to the podcast, come check us out.
Yes, you can find our podcast on all major platforms and be sure to follow us on Instagram at Chicago Queer Sober Social. You can contact us at queersobersocial@gmail.com or leave us a voice message on our Anchor page with any questions or stories that you'd like to share with us. Thank you so much for listening to the Queer Sober Social podcast. Thank you, Phoebe, for being an amazing guest. And always remember,
You are queer enough,
you are sober enough.
and you are enough. Well, thank you, everybody. Oh man, perfect timing. My light just died. We're gonna take a break just for a couple seconds, a couple minutes more likely, and then we'll jump into the after show where if you are in the chat or if you are live streaming this right now, you can feel free to ask any questions of Phoebe or of us or anything like that. Come and join the conversation. Alrighty, so we'll see you in a couple seconds. Thanks, everybody. See you in a bit. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We are now a part of the world famous after show. This is exclusive just to YouTube and to Twitch. And we are happy to have Phoebe sticking around for a while longer. We will be going for about a half hour. And so if you are in chat, feel free to ask any questions. Grab a friend to come and join us. Like, that works too. And we can just, have a conversation. Otherwise, it'll just be us hanging out, which is also okay by us. Well, before we jump into some of the stuff that we maybe wanted to talk about, Phoebe, was there anything that you didn't have a chance to talk about that you is burning that you want to make sure that you say that people need to hear?
Mm.
Answer can be no. That's totally fine.
No, I want to know if there are any questions or comments, or if anything's coming up in chat, or if anyone's tuning in.
Nothing at the moment.
That
I will definitely be sure
Cool.
to pause the conversation and read out anybody who does chat in at the time.
Sounds good. Yeah. Hmm. I don't know. It's been it's been a journey. It's been 6 months since I left corporate.
Congrats.
4 months. Thanks. I've had
Milestone.
yeah, I had calls this week with some of my old colleagues, just like working the networks, you know. Um
Yep, as you do.
Dipping a toe back
yeah.
in.
It was interesting. One of the guys was like, "Yeah, the stuff you're posting on LinkedIn talking about sobriety and leaving tech and leaving corporate, I had a reaction to that." And I was like, "Yeah."
Fascinating.
He's like, "It was good for me to hear." I'm like, "Okay, what does that mean?" Just with the pandemic, I just feel like I can drink a lot. I'm like, "Okay, go work on that then."
Yeah.
Well, are you reaching out for help or what is this?
I reached out because I wanted him to know what's up. Because I'm doing this thing where I'm opening my mouth and telling people what I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
instead of just creating my stuff in a vac, which I never really did. But I'm going further and into the business networks instead of just staying in the queer creatives networks, which felt safer.
Yeah.
Now I'm actually jumping back into LinkedIn and jumping into the
Yeah.
texting people that I used to VPs of sales, which is scary, and being like, "Hey, here I am," and all my meanness now, and this is what I'm doing, and then not hearing back. I'm
Yep.
like, ugh.
The game is very different.
But then yeah, yeah, but then people do text me back, or amazing people are like, "Hey, can we take a call? I really want to hear what you're doing," and so it's just it balances itself out, and the right people have been finding me, the people who share about my values now. Feels good.
So Marty in chat is
That's
saying,
what happens
"Oh, sorry. Go right ahead, Carly, and I'll read
when you
chat
start
after you."
telling the truth, and when you, like you said, Phoebe, when you start venturing into spaces that may feel unsafer than you're normally used to, that's how you find new people. I mean, coming out on
Hmm.
LinkedIn like that, which I'm gonna have to go look back at and see your post for sure for my own personal reference, because that's
Casual,
baller.
sliding it in there. I wasn't like, "Hello, I'm here, I'm queer." I added it to my bio, and I would drop it in a post casually,
No,
not
I love it.
BT dubs.
Yeah, you know what though? Yeah, seriously, hey, if you're looking me up now, this is who I am, in case you were wondering. No, but it is it's very public. I think this resonates with me because I'm also, plotting my LinkedIn coming out, I guess. So, you just reach a point where you're just like, this is me, take it or leave it. And you know what? I'm not ashamed, and I'm just super proud of who I am today. And I think the thing that scares me about the LinkedIn thing is well, like you said, people that have known me in the past and known me as a completely different person, and seeing things that I might be up to now or changing about my bio now. Um, I think some people would be proud too. So instead of being scared, yeah, just tapping into the confidence and tapping into the excitement. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I think it's I realize this with especially things like poly, which are a little less, people are like, "Hmm." how does that work? and,
Oh boy.
but as long as you're confident and you're not apologetic and like, oh, it's something to be ashamed of.
Mm.
Like people are kind of just like curious, and they want to
Totally.
understand.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, that
that's
I hate when people say, I did a thing. It's like I hate that. I will like always hate that because I'm like, just like no who like what straight white cis male ever comes out and says on Instagram or like Facebook, I did a thing. Like, no, they just do things and then they just come out and talk about it. Instead of us like little meek, like, oh, is it okay for me to do a thing? I don't know, but I did it. Here it is. It's really cool. I like did this or that. I ran a marathon. I started a company. It's like, no, you did a really cool, crazy, badass thing. And you're gonna be like, I did a thing. That's just a tangent. I just really hate when people
I appreciate that. No, I think it's like the apologizing, the like, sorry, I'm taking up space.
Yes.
Sorry that I want to brag about it. Sorry, I want to talk about it.
Mm.
Sorry, sorry,
Yes.
sorry.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, the platform.
Uh,
Go ahead, Carly. Sorry.
You're good. Go ahead, Rajiv. Because in the apologetic culture, just like that, like women or female identifying folks have just been told like you must apologize for taking up space, and it's just so internalized. The freaking. Anyway, Rajiv, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say like a platform like LinkedIn like has so many like things that are attached to it, just putting it on there. But like not, I mean, being meek is not one of them. And so like if you're gonna be, like loud and proud about whatever it is that you did, that's a really easy, cool place and straightforward place to do it because everybody's just gonna be supportive in whatever way, shape, or form. You're gonna find your right people in some way, shape, or form. And and like it's just another place for you to be able to say what's going on, which I think is kind of nice.
Yeah. That's a really good point, I think, because we build stuff up in our heads. My therapist said to me this week, she's like, things can just be kind of not that big of a deal. Like,
Right? Yeah, totally.
it doesn't have to mean like that it's this big existential thing. I'm like, are you sure? Like feel like I'm a very like I'm, whatever I am. And so I think you're right though. Like as long as you come from a place of confidence, the people who aren't for that will fall away and just
Yep.
like noise or they're going to be like, "Oh, I'm intrigued because like a part of them is responding to it."
Hmm.
And then there are people who are going to be like, "There you are, my people." And then you find your people and they send you a DM like Mercy did. And then you create a company together.
Right,
So it's
exactly.
like
I love
fairy
that.
tale.
So I wanted to read out a chat that we got. So Marty in chat says, "Understand this is nice hearing that. It's okay to do so as I'm going through the same as you, Phoebe, because I think they were reacting to just like some of the stuff you were starting out with this on. So absolutely, like, and again, thank you for sharing all of your stories and just the authentic you that is here, like, is great. It's a lot of fun to have on here.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's like, there are a couple topics we talked about that I don't want to talk about publicly yet. um, and
Okay.
I'm working on that balance of it's like a yin and yang where I have certain parts of myself that are like for me that are my privacy that I will not share with anybody.
Mm.
And then it bleeds like a little bit of that will bleed over into the light, which is the black part of the yin. Or I don't even know. I'm not doing a good job at explaining what like a nice metaphor. Please don't quote me. I'm not trying to appropriate. But
Don't at her.
The Taoists in the chat.
yeah, no. Like what is the line for me? And that line changes every day. But there are certain things that I'm like, nope, these are for me because we
Hmm.
live in this really digital society where we're constantly having a conversation with ourselves about what do I share with people?
Right.
It's like this thing we think about all the time. And that's basically this conversation, right? It's like,
Yeah.
what do I feel safe saying on the internet? And it's not a problem like our parents had when they were our age. Just like,
Right.
and I look at like Gen Z. I think millennials we kind of got fucked because
Because it was so new.
from we're because we're between a generation where you just didn't do this, and
Right.
then this other generation where it's like, yeah, I have an OnlyFans, so what? And like and we're in the middle of that and trying to like be like, okay, well, I don't want to share so much because like these are my values that I learned and that I hold. And then there's other people who are like me who are really attracted to Gen Z and this like, yeah, let's tell the truth because a lot of people would be better off, but then they have their own issues where they're like totally digitally like glued to their phones. And so creating in-person community and having generative conflict in person
Hmm.
is a lot harder for them.
Hmm.
And generative conflict is what we need to build, more trusting, more solid communities. But we're just, that's to me the biggest opportunity we have, I think, right now is how can we be in conflict with each other in a way that we feel we can be messy and show up imperfectly and be safe and be held and fight and but fight in a loving way so that we can hear each other and disagree. And I just don't think that we're creating a lot of space for that, or we don't have the frameworks for it. I've been learning a lot about transformative justice and
Hmm.
trying to incorporate that into my work more. I am just like such a little amoeba in that work, and um, yeah, I see that as a big opportunity for anyone who's creating space and community to take seriously the teachings of mostly Black and Brown people who've been teaching transformative justice principles and movement work and bringing it into our virtual and in person communities that aren't centered on social justice, maybe. But that's just one little girl's perspective. Oh, look at me, like totally undermining
No, I
everything.
was gonna say, like, no, come on, Phoebe.
So funny. It's funny. We do that though.
Absolutely. And it is a hard habit to break, especially if it's been like for literal decades or ages that you just have a lot of this stuff going on. I think an interesting place to also connect all of that transformative justice piece is, I mean, like, I came from an IO psychology background. I came from an organizational behavior background, like academically. And so, like, those sorts of topics, there are frameworks and there are things. I don't think those two worlds are talking to each other. And so if you do think about topics like psychological safety, that is the same sort of thing of being able to show up as messy. Or you're talking about some of like the conflict theory and like what that looks like. That's exact same sort of thing, like norming and storming and forming and adjourning, like that framework of creating groups, like that is showing up messily and like having that generative conflict. And so like as someone who kind of sits in between those two worlds, like seeing those connection points, I think is another opportunity, really, is to be able to connect stuff that's been sitting in textbooks and like research papers for decades now, I'm sure, and some of the like cultural contexts and conversations that are now actually taking root and actually finding some speed and space, even though they've been talked about for literal decades as well. I think they can come together, and I definitely hear you on that point where there is a lot of opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I when you say that, to me, I'm like, God, there's so much work to do. And so I'm like, where's everyone else? Like, can you come join us, please? Because there's abundance. There's a lot of work to do. And I feel like Alexis, right? I've been really adopting Alexis's mannerisms from Schitt's Creek.
Yes.
I'm just like, there's so much work to do, David. Uh,
Ew, the patriarchy.
off promotion. There's the patriarchy, David. But there is. It's like a never ending. There's so much to do, and we need people who are willing to stand up and try. And it's like there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
So you sitting at home being like, "Well, should I?" It's like, yeah, come on.
Come on over, baby. But I agree with both of you, obviously. But what to Phoebe's point of like, I remember the world was so broken when I got sober. I got sober in 2017, and it's like I wanted to be this person that was able to engage in this work, but I had to do the work of saving my own life first. And if that's where you're at, like, if that's okay, that's totally fine. Do that. Put a pin in the work that you want to do for the world, and then just come back to it. Like, time is on your side, and you have plenty once you get sober. So, even though it can feel overwhelming today with the amount of things going on and work that needs to be done, ultimately you have to build a foundation of work that you've done for yourself so that you can show up for others. So just want to put that out there for anyone that needs that.
Good point. Good point. And that's the thing. It'll be waiting for you when you're ready. And you being in a place where you can where you're stable and well and feel good and at home in your skin, and then you're like, okay, I have the tools. My toolkit is, got lots of stuff I can pull from. My foundation is solid. I've been pouring into that. For me, I was like starting from, if like self-esteem starts here, I was over here in the negative route. Like there was negative self-esteem, so I had to fill that up first. Or maybe let's start down here. So if there was like this is the bottom. I was below that, it felt like. And then I had to fill it all up. So eventually I had enough self-esteem where I was like, okay, I don't I feel like I like myself enough and I believe in myself and I trust myself and I'm going to take care of myself through this even when it gets hard, and that I'm still worthy and I'm still okay and it's going to be okay. Um I needed to do that work first before I could have ever stepped into. And I think the Queer Sober Social was my first thing that I did so as a sober person where I was organizing community um, as someone with self-esteem. It was like my first project, I guess. And before that, I had been just working on myself for 2.5 2 years, and I needed to take that time away.
I think that's such an important point. Like wherever you are, like that's fine. Like that is valid. Um, if you know where you're going, that's also important because some of this is the result of literal years of work for you, Phoebe. And for some people who might be watching this after the fact or listening to this, they may feel like that's an impossible thing for them right now. And totally cool. Like just take your time and figure it out. But here are some tools. Here's what success could look like. Maybe not the same for you. It won't show up in the same ways, and probably won't. But like, here's one example, and like, why not just try it for yourself? Maybe that could be like, maybe it shows up in like you are able to make that progress just through your sips of air, and you're still like in your corporate job or you're still figuring out your sobriety or your queerness or whatever, and that's fine. But like, as long as you have some sort of forward momentum, I think that's the point. Like, that's really the best that we can all do.
Definitely. That the one little it's like the one thing at a time. You can't do it all at once. And you can't jump rungs on the ladder. You got to climb the
Mhm.
ladder one rung at a time. And trying to skip rungs, it's just like you can't. And if you try to, it's going to hurt a lot. And you're not going to get the wisdom that you'll gain by going through it. And I'm grateful that I could keep that perspective. I don't even know how I was able to maintain that point of view through the early years,
Hmm.
and just trust that it would be okay and that I'd continue to figure it out. I think that's my spirituality.
I was gonna say because that's like, yeah, that requires a bit of work to get to a place where you are actively believing that you will be okay, um, even in the face of like a lot of resistance, whatever shape or form that takes.
Yeah. This this and our conversation from earlier just reminded me of like something that carries me is like everything is figure outable, or like it will be figured out. Like,
Sure.
and maybe it won't go the way that you want it to. And I'm not saying like dismantling the patriarchy will be figured out. Like, but it is figure outable. Like, and that is a larger that is a larger thing. But just knowing like there is action that you can take towards things, and I think that's something that I've learned in sobriety is like there is no sitting on the sidelines anymore. Like you have to get up, you have to take action no matter what that looks like, even if it's super tiny like we talked about. But I think also going back to this, if you're just like really overwhelmed by how much work there is to do. Another thing that helps me is like Glennon Doyle talks about, you find the work that you're meant to be called for by looking inward and realizing like what causes break your heart the most. Like what breaks your heart, figure that out, and then look for the people that are the helpers, the people that are helping with that cause, that are doing something to make a difference in that cause. And so maybe not everything in the world can be your cause. Obviously the world has a lot of causes and there's a lot of things that need help and that are broken, that need fixing or, revamping, but find something that speaks to you and that breaks your heart. like that truly, because that's the passion. That's where the passion will come from. That's where the fuel to do the work will come from. So I think that was a really a good place to start if you feel really overwhelmed by like what do I do? Where do I go?
The question I used to ask because I used to coach people, um, and it was, what comes really easy to you? Like what feels really easy? What came easy to you as a kid and like throughout your whole life? What came really easy to you? Oftentimes I found that what people did when they were little is stuff that that's like in them and they want to tap into. A lot of times they just won't let themselves.
Fascinating.
It is. It's like what someone I used to talk to, one of the people I used to work with, she would we're talking about this and she's like, I just want to like create a nest in my closet and like create a fort all by myself and just get lost in it for hours and read and write and like she used to like taking books and copying them onto paper or something like some kind of like weird thing, but I was like, okay, like just do that then. Just see how it goes, see how that feels. And like this afternoon I've been doing this thing since I was a kid where I would lay on the ground or in the sun and just have my journal in front of me and listen to music and just like stare at the wall or the ceiling. And every time I do that, I feel so grounded and in my body and like me. And yeah, I think it's important to reconnect to like little you and that it wouldn't feel safe anyway. I'm not a therapist. Carly's a therapist.
Right.
No, you're making I am, but you're making me think about something that I've been thinking about a lot. Well, I think especially with the quarantine, like activities that people are coming up with, it makes you connect back to the time that we had as young millennials before the internet. And like, what did we do with our freaking time before we had smartphones? And it makes you think. And I've seen a lot of people doing rollerblading or like roller skating as their new quarantine hobby. And you just talking about that, your client Phoebe, like doing that weird reading book thing that made me think about roller skating. Like, I used to be like, when people would have the roller skating birthday parties, like it was my birthday party. Like I was the queen of the rink. And I've been like looking at all these people's Instagrams that have gotten skates and like their trajectory of like learning and like, because we're adults now, our center of gravity is a lot higher. My risk for injury is a lot higher. So yeah, you're making me think about that, how I want to try that. So
So funny.
I want to know what Rajiv's thinking about.
I I'm thinking about things like if you are trying to uh I mean the technical word is reparent yourself, but like if you are trying to like connect with that inner child that's in you, um some of that, like even to get there, requires a little bit of space. And quarantine has unfortunately been like squeezing the space out of everybody, even if you are solo, even if you are like in your own spot, just because of like the virtue of like you don't have the ability to just, some people, like especially in some of the jobs, like it's just become even worse. And like you no longer have the ability to just lay down in the sun and journal. Like that feels like an impossible thing for some people. Um, and I can appreciate that because like when you were talking about Phoebe, how you were just coming from a place of depletion, like underneath in terms of self-esteem. There's also places where people are probably coming at this from like depletion of energy or depletion of space or something like that, where they just need to be able to figure out some way to like get them back up to zero, and then they can figure it all out. And that's kind of where my head is going because even that process like looks very different from when you're at zero and then starting to build on top of it. Because like it's a little bit of like survival instincts and survival mode, and then you can go ahead and start thriving.
Oh my God, yeah. I think it's super important. I appreciate you calling attention to that. That like that awakening that is early sobriety or the months leading up to a decision around it, or even just like a big harm reduction push for yourself or
Mm.
whatever that looks like. It is really gnarly and painful, and it feels lonely because you're just going through this fucking crazy, horrifying, and I'm trying not to use crazy because not a great word to use, but it's this horrifying experience. For me, it was a, I'm not going to speak for everyone. For me, it was a horrifying experience. I was very lonely, and I felt very connected to my spirituality in the universe. I felt like I was like in a movie, and I'm just going through this hard thing, and I'm choosing myself, and I'm building, and I don't know, I'm like building myself, and actually paying attention to myself in a different way for the first time in my whole life.
Mm.
It felt like I had been on autopilot for so long and doing what everyone else wanted, and like letting my conditioning and programming run the show. And then I finally was like, fuck, I got to do something else because it's killing me. I feel like shit. I feel terrible. This isn't what I want. And that has happened in different ways. Every time I get to that point, and you're right, Carly, like you were saying earlier, it was sobriety, and then after that, it was other things. It was my relationships, like with my husband, where I was like, I can't have sex with you anymore because it's I don't want it. My body doesn't want it. How are we going to do this? And then figuring out how we remain in relationship with each other because we're family, and move forward from that. But that was a process leading up to that. And then leaving corporate, and like it keeps going, that still keeps happening, you
Mm-hmm.
know. But it definitely, it's not easier. It's easier because I'm well, most more well, as well as you can be in a pandemic. We don't I don't think we really understand what has just happened to us and what is happening to us at all.
Yeah.
At least I don't. I can't begin to process it. I'm just kind of like, well, I guess we'll see in a few years what they say.
Yeah, we're in it. We're in it right now. Just
Yeah.
acknowledging that. Oh, there's so much like I have to say to you about what you just said, Phoebe, but I appreciate you too, Richie, bringing it up too. It reminds me of being a sim, and like how your
Mm.
sim has like hunger level and like happiness level
Right.
and tiredness level. And it's like you can assess, you can like do your own like assessment on yourself. Like, where are my like levels today? Like, how am I doing? Am I hungry? Like, am I tired? What can I do to like help myself? So it just made me think of it in that way, which is funny. But in terms of what you were saying, Phoebe, and to bring it back to community and how lonely getting sober can be because it's literally just you, and it's like you dealing with you, and obviously you've probably used substances and alcohol to not have to deal with you for a long time, so like dealing with yourself after like being really sick of your own bullshit is like the worst. And I was thinking about the first women's meetup that I actually went to, which was the first one that existed, and it wasn't until I was 9 months sober at that point, and I just remember leaving that dinner that we had. There was like 8 of us at the first one, and I just went home and just cried and cried and cried and cried because I felt so seen, and I had just gone from being alone in my room for 9 months, just thinking that I was the only person in my 20s getting sober, figuring out my sexuality. I knew no one else going through this. All my friends were still
Mm.
drinking and at the bars and partying. And then just to go to this dinner and to show up and have these women there, like saying things that I needed to hear, and just like meeting them. It was just so like that is so important, and creating these communities is so important. So like once you get yourself to a point where you're a sim and you're all your levels are in the green, and then it's time to just come out and build these communities because they are so needed, like for survival, for thrival, for people to discover themselves, to connect with you. So I don't know, I just want to put a PSA out there for like community building. This is what we talk about, which is how all three of us have met. So you do the work, and then you just keep showing up, and you continue to find your people, and you speak your truth, and that's like the magic comes from there. The magic happens.
Definitely. I mean,
Absolutely.
100% agree.
Tricky.
Like it's what else like that it's frustrating because like a lot of times like especially as you're going through that I'm not somebody who's gone through recovery. Like that process of getting sober like never has happened for me because it never started, I guess, in a way. Like but like the same processes exist in all of the other things that we're talking about. Because like you trying to avoid yourself can show up in so many different ways. And that can be like, it can be by you jumping into a corporate job and then just trying to run away from yourself because you're diving headfirst into work. it can be where you're like diving into creating a family or whatever that is and focusing on other people so you're not able to focus on yourself. Like whatever that might look like feels very similar, or I assume feels very similar. Again, but like the topics at least are similar in my head. And so I think that that kind of feels like it's the grounding point behind all of this is if we are trying to say if we are trying to like underscore the piece about being mindful and understanding what is actually going on and you being able to pay attention to that because that's a muscle that a lot of us just aren't strong with, like it's it's important to understand where that is coming from in the first place and like what is the thing that's pulling you away from that level of mindfulness. And that I think is something that I don't know, like that what is keeping you from getting your sim to like all green? Like what is the thing that's like kind of pulling that away? That's kind of where I feel like this conversation is heading. And I think that in future conversations we definitely need to keep talking about it because I think it's such an important piece of the culture building, which is now that people have kind of figured out for themselves who are they, such an important first point. Then it's like, all right, well, who are the like self-actualized yous wanting to hang out with or be a community with? It's a little bit more metaphysical and a little bit more, like ethereal, a concept. Maybe not monetizable for business people, but whatever. Like, I think it's just important for humanity, and I think that that's why this kind of topic and the kinds of things that we're talking about is so important.
Yeah, I want to just like respond to what you just said about it not being monetizable. I think that there's this like at least what I'm learning and forming an opinion around is this idea that these softer community building, empathy, um, like that there's no place for that in capitalism and that we can't survive and create businesses. It's like I'm not I'm anti-capitalist, but I'm pro-business for
Hmm.
in especially as a queer um femme person. I love business. I love, you know what I do all day long right now? I get to talk to really interesting people with really interesting stories, and I get to create a platform for them to share their story with people. And I get to make sure that they get paid for doing that labor and that I get paid for doing my labor. And that's business. That's the business that I'm building
Hmm.
right now. And I think that's really interesting and that I can think because business is, at least I'm finding I can create business in a way that fits my values and that amplifies the values of those around me that I find to be I don't know, it's weird. It's also I'm a white woman gatekeeping the people that we're inviting onto this platform too. So I am highly aware of that role that I'm playing, and so bringing in other people to help make sure that I say we for the group of people that I'm building with, that we're making sure that we're bringing in intersectional voices and that it's not just the same people and that the stories are layered and nuanced and like, but that's work, that's business. We're
Yeah.
able to pay people for their labor for that. It's really, it's um I don't know, capitalism is so hard because we're all in it, and we, even if we're opting out by going off the grid and living in a shack, we're still participating by saying no to it.
Hmm.
Right.
And I don't know, it's like it's this lifelong struggle I've had of wanting to create change and feeling like my place to do that is by being in the system and by toiling within it. Whereas for some people, that's like being in the streets and grass organizing in that kind of sense, like movement sense. For me, I feel like I'm meant to be in tech or in corporate or wherever, helping the people who are in the system heal and get better so that they can help other people heal and get better, and we can like it's like light from the inside out. I don't know, that's the way I see it today.
I think that's a fair
I really
counterpoint.
appreciate that point of view.
Absolutely. And perhaps it's just my lack of creativity to think about it because I haven't necessarily thought about it. And there are ways. Like it's another one of those figure outable things. Like
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know I believed for a very long time that I could not be creative and make a living and survive and thrive, and that I being I didn't go to I was going to go to school for creative writing, and I didn't because it wasn't practical. I went to school for international relations and economics, which, like, okay. I'm an artist through and through. Like, what? That was not me. That was my family. That was
Hmm.
world. That was everyone telling me that's how you're going to make money and be okay. And then over here, my like creative little goddess, she was like, fuck you. Like, what are we doing? And then she died for a while and now she's back. So, but then I have all these experiences from that, the last decade of being in it, and I'm able to use both forces to create something new, which feels really fun and good. And I didn't know I could do that. Mercy and I had a moment where we were like crying with each other on Zoom, my co-founder, because she was saying, I didn't know business could feel this good.
Hmm.
I didn't know I could be in community and be working with people like this and be creating things that are beautiful because when you're in it and you're not doing that every day, it's hard to believe that it's out there and you can do it. Not that every day is perfect, but it's a lot better.
I think that's such an important message because if you don't know what you don't know, it's really hard to be able to come up. Like you have to like reinvent it. But if you see somebody who can do it or has done it, or you see some sort of spark where you can see the end goal, like that makes it a million times easier. Well, we are at 5:30 Central, and it's been such a wonderful conversation with you, Phoebe. Thank you so much again for joining us. Um, Happy International Women's Day for people on Monday. And
Aw.
are there any parting words that you might want to have before we end this stream entirely?
Feel the fear and do it anyway.
Good words, wise words. Again, thank you, everybody. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Take care of yourselves. Bye, everybody.
Bye.